Hey everyone, Gill Gross here, and it is time for another mailbag where I answer your questions, hot takes, observations, and ultimately your comments about tennis or anything else. I posted on the YouTube community tab late last week. You also left comments on my Discord server. The link is in the description. We are powered by BetUS. This week's mailbag is in place of Monday Match Analysis. Shanghai 12-day Masters. No final to break down on this Monday, but I wanted to supply you with a show here at the start of the week. Schedule's all out of whack, right? Beijing final last Wednesday. Monday Match Analysis came out on Thursday. Please do check that out if you have not already. Sinner Alcaraz analysis. Many of you, I'm sure, already have. There are a lot of follow-ups to the Sinner Alcaraz match in this week's mailbag comment section. No surprise there, but I did want to follow up on something real quick. Two major themes that I discussed on Monday Match Analysis. I was able to get a look at some data. Our friends at Tennis Insights hooked me up, and I looked at some data, and sometimes I get an opportunity to see, am I right? Were my eyes correct when I was watching the match? And in this case, I think I did pretty well. I talked about Alcaraz's forehand, that it was an overwhelming weapon in this match, that even by his standards, he was ripping the cover off the ball beyond belief, that he was blowing Sinner off the court with the brute force of his forehand at times. And the data does flesh that out. When Alcaraz was hitting topspin forehands from the middle of the court, first I'm going to tell you that on forehands from the middle of the court on the ATP Tour, when you take it into the deuce side, the tour average is 80 miles per hour. Alcaraz's average is 81 miles per hour. Against Sinner in the Beijing final, it was 87 miles per hour. That is a ridiculous number. Okay, when you take the forehand into the ad side from the middle of the court, the tour average goes down 3 miles per hour, 77. Alcaraz's average is 79. Against Sinner, he averaged 85 miles per hour on the forehand from the middle of the court into the ad corner. So when he got to set his feet and dictate from the middle with his forehand, oftentimes Jannik just had no chance because of the force that Alcaraz was generating off of that wing. Another thing that I did comment on from Alcaraz's point of view was how many backhands he was missing, and that's the one area that I was critical of his performance. Great healthy debate in the comment section. Many people disagreeing with me about Alcaraz's backhand, because I said that when his forehand is performing like that at the very highest level, he should make sure not to miss too many backhands. That was basically my opinion. A lot of disagreement. A lot of you guys like the Alcaraz double sword strategy. Lots of aggression off of both wings. And by the way, if you look at his average backhand speed, it was up 3 miles per hour, up from his season average, 3 miles per hour against Sinner. So he was hitting it bigger than normal, same as the forehand. But backhands in percentage, better stat than unforced errors. It should be on all stat pages. 75%. So Alcaraz, indeed, he missed 1 in every 4 backhands he hit in the match. His regular backhands in percentage is 85%. So his consistency really suffered. If you want to compare it to Sinner's backhands in percentage, and I think, Jannik was actually down in this stat. He's normally 87%, and he was 82% in the final. But that's still 7% better than Alcaraz. Much more consistent on the backhand. But, you expect these things. I'm not saying Alcaraz needs to be as consistent as Sinner, but 75% backhands in, it's a pretty bad number. And I do think that had Alcaraz actually lost that match against Jannik, you would have been able to point at that in a big way. So, I don't know. I think the data kind of backed me up on that. But I also completely understand the other side of the benefits of Alcaraz going after it off of both wings. By the way, last thing before I get to the comments. I also watched Alcaraz play Jerry Shang to open up that Shanghai campaign. And it was just more brutality from Alcaraz. Just overwhelmingly good. And the level right now that he's attacking at, and just the level of offense coming off of his racket in these conditions, I'm inclined to say that he's going to win. And I know I picked him to get upset, but let's just say watching him play that first round match against a player who I have a lot of respect for in Jerry Shang, even right now, and he's going to get a lot better, but even right now I have a lot of respect for him. First match in the new conditions, coming off of the title, and he plays that well. I gotta kind of say that I'm not confident in my pick anymore. The logic was that it was a really tough scheduling spot for him to go from Laver Cup to Beijing to Shanghai. That's no joke. That's no joke with the travel and then the nonstop nature of that. Really tough spot. I think he might get through it anyway. Plus a really tough draw. So tough draw, tough scheduling spot. I decided to roll the dice and pick against Alcaraz, but after watching the level of tennis he's played, yeah, not feeling very good about that. All right, let's get to the comments. First one is from Nature Lover 266. Mats Wilander has said that when Sinner and Alcaraz are at their best, that's the highest level of tennis anyone can reach. Even the BIG-3 couldn't reach that level. What are your thoughts on that? Love your content from Pakistan. Thank you. This was a big talking point last week. The king of tennis hot takes is at it again. The Stephen A. Smith of tennis comes in with another banger. Mats Wilander, baby. I love this guy. Even when I disagree with him all the time. I am going to zag on this one. I think Wilander took way too much heat for this take from the likes of seemingly the entirety of tennis Twitter and even some big names such as Boris Becker pushing back on this Mats Wilander take, which, by the way, his exact quote, I hope Roger, Novak, and Rafa are not listening, but in terms of level, when Sinner and Alcaraz are at their best, there is no way anyone has ever played better tennis. That's what Wilander said. And then everybody lost their mind. Here's why I'm going to defend Mats for this. I'm not saying he's right unequivocally, but let's say Mats is correct. Like, let's say this is the right take. Nobody is going to be on board with it. And that's why I defend Wilander, because it's so predictable that everyone jumps on him and says that this is the craziest thing they've ever heard. It's the nature of tennis that makes it impossible to deliver a take like this and not get pushback, even if it's the right take. Let me explain. Tennis, it is a prove-it sport, and you count up from zero. Young players never get the respect that, I'm not going to say that they ultimately deserve, but they never get the respect that ultimately they will proven to have deserved later on in time. In other words, let me give you an example. When Jannik Sinner and Carlos Alcaraz played in the Alicante Challenger, I believe in 2021, I might have the year wrong, but that was their first ever meeting, the Alicante Challenger. If I came on here and said, hey, that second round match, Alicante Challenger, those two are both going to be world number one. And not only that, they're both going to do it in the next 3 years, the next 3-4 years. Of course, at that time, people would have been like, dumb take, awful, what are you talking about? Because they just hadn't proven it yet. This is what I mean by tennis is such a prove-it sport that you can't say anything like this without people it's almost like you're not allowed to give someone respect until their countable numerical accomplishments reach a certain level. Any correct take about Sinner and Alcaraz in 2021 when they played the second round of the Alicante Challenger would have sounded like a dumb take. When Nadal and Federer played in Miami in 2004, if you said this rivalry is going to be better than Sampras Agassi, would people have bought it? Would people have been on board with that? Or would people have been like, hey man, Rafa hasn't even won a title. He's got no titles. So like, can we relax? I'm pretty sure it would have been the latter. I wasn't really there for the discourse at that time, but I'm pretty sure it would have been the latter. And this is why you can't win with a take like this in tennis. And the pushback is way over the top, because here are two things that are always true. Always. The first thing is that sporting level improves over time. Every sport that objectively measures shows this to be true. Any sport with a timer, any sport like weightlifting, where there's no room for subjectivity, the heavier you lift, the better you are. Every sport that measures shows that it's getting better and better and better. That's the first thing that's true. The second thing that's true is every sport that doesn't measure has old heads saying it used to be better. You say Sinner and Alcaraz aren't as good as the big three. How do you know that right now? Because Alcaraz has 4 slams and he's 21 years old. And Sinner, at 23, is having a season where he's winning 90% of his matches. Statistically, it's elite of the elite, what he's done this year. So that take that Wilander said, it wouldn't have come out of my mouth, because I'm not convinced that either player is polished enough to, especially best of 5 in a big match. I'm not convinced that either player is polished enough right now to have beaten prime Federer, prime Djokovic, prime Nadal. That's my opinion. But am I going to ridicule Wilander's opinion? No, I actually think he has a good chance to eventually be correct here. He's got a decent chance. And everybody acted like he said the earth was flat. He did not say the earth was flat, all right? He might be right. And ultimately, time will tell, because if Sinner and Alcaraz numerically, when we count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and that's what we do in tennis, if they get up there, then we won't ridicule Mats. But before you get to a high enough number, in tennis discourse, we basically tend to refuse to give players respect as an all-time great. But in reality, you don't become an all-time great once you hit 10 majors. You were when you won your 5th. Let's face it. And that's the point I want to make here. So I think Wilander took way too much heat. Next one from 11AWPT. Hey, Gill, considering Medvedev is still titleist this year, moving forward, do you think it will be beneficial for him to simply play more 250s or avoid Sincaraz by entering different tournaments such as Tokyo instead of Beijing, since every time when he seems to be close, he just comes up short against those two? Will the confidence boost of winning the title serve him better, do you think? Good question. I don't think the key to solving Medvedev's problems is to go chase down a 250 title so that he doesn't need to say that the last title he won was Rome 2023, Rome last year. Now, it is true that that's a long time without lifting a trophy. It is true that I think that's something that will weigh somewhat heavily on Daniil. It is true that since Rome 2023, Medvedev is 0-5 in finals, that all 5 of those finals have been against either Djokovic, Alcaraz, or Sinner. But I have my doubts that had Medvedev won Tokyo, that would, in the long term, do anything for him. Plus, there's definitely a mental and a physical tax on title chasing. When you're going deep at slams, deep at the big events, the Masters 1000s like Daniil Medvedev, is it really worth it to crowd your schedule, to pack your schedule in order to find a title run? I don't think so. Would it really help him win another slam, which is ultimately the goal? And that's what it comes down to for me when answering this question. It's like, look, Medvedev has won 20 career titles. Ultimately, what's going to define him moving forward is his ability to win a second major, maybe his ability to contend for a year-end number one. But there are systematic issues right now in his game that he needs to figure out. And I just don't think winning a title is a quick fix. All right, next one is from Bakugo. This was the top liked comment on the YouTube community section. Can we just have a hard discussion about the possibility of Sinner facing a 2-year ban? What is the likelihood of that happening? How would it affect his career? How would it affect Alcaraz's career? So I intentionally, when covering the WADA appeal, I did not make a prediction on the Sinner ban because I don't feel like it's helpful. I don't have much of a clue in terms of trying to make that kind of prediction. And yeah, I don't think really much of anybody were to have much of a clue. I will say this, though. The 2-year number, that is the maximum for unintentional doping. So if you are ruled to have significant fault and negligence, but you are not ruled to have intentionally doped, 2 years is the max. So I am comfortable saying that the 2-year thing seems pretty unlikely to me, because the consensus seems to be that Jannik himself wasn't negligent, but his team was, and this is a matter of basically, does Sinner pay the price for that? Because that's the issue at hand, I can't see them going to the 2-year end of the spectrum. But I think the real question is that no fault or negligence going to hold? Because Jannik certainly won't be satisfied unless that remains the case. I don't think, some fault or negligence, whether the suspension is 1 year or 6 months or whatever, right? Remember that WADA's looking for 1 to 2 years. That doesn't mean the CAS can't turn around and say, the ban is 1 month or the ban is 2 months or 3 or 4. And, that's why I feel completely ill-equipped to make any kind of a prediction, and I have no interest in making a prediction. But I do feel pretty comfortable with an understanding that the 2-year is the maximum for unintentional doping. It would be a shocker if Jannik Sinner got that. I would feel comfortable that he won't, and I don't think he should. What else is in your question? How would it affect his career? I mean, if we want to do the 2-year hypothetical thing for the sake of it, look, I think historically it's had a long, missing that much time has had long-term negative impacts on players' careers. Just looking at the pattern of it all, it might, things might change if you're 23 when it happens. I'm not sure. Or if you have a unique level of drive and desire to improve. They're not all players are the same. It goes without saying, but certainly Sharapova wasn't the same when she came back from her 16 months. She made 3 major semifinals in 2014 and 2015. And then when she came back from her doping ban, she never made the final weekend of a slam ever again. I don't know that there are a lot of great examples outside of Sharapova when it comes to players who are actually contending for major titles at the time that they had to take an extended absence due to a doping situation. You could say Halep, and Halep has really struggled since. But although she played really well in Canada before the U.S. Open upset to Darius Sneager, if I'm remembering all of this, I don't know. It feels like there might be some other things at play with Halep. I suppose Halep could apply here. And then if you look at players who maybe didn't miss time because of any sort of doping ban at all, but seem to kind of miss an extended amount of time and come back, And I don't know why, but it just feels like there are way more examples of this on the women's side. I mean, Caroline Wozniacki has struggled. Naomi Osaka has struggled coming back this year. Kim Clijsters tried to come back. That didn't really work. Serena was successful, very successful, but never ultimately got over the hump. Wasn't able to tack on to her major count after coming back from her pregnancy. So, look, I don't think you can just copy and paste that to Sinner, but what I will say is when you're off the tour, when you're not competing, you aren't getting better. And when you're not getting better, you're likely getting worse. So I think it's very difficult to miss a ton of time. And I think it sets you back in the long term generally. How would it affect Alcaraz's career? Yeah, I mean, that would depend on the landscape of everybody else. You know, how are other players playing? There's no time frame right now for the CAS decision. I imagine it will come down at some point in 2025. That's my best guess. But I don't think we need to speculate any further on this question. Next one is from Greg Lopez. In your last Monday match analysis, you talked about how Alcaraz was unopportunistic on break points in the Beijing final. That reminded me of some research I did back in July and compared the BIG-3 next-gen players Sinner and Alcaraz do on break points compared to other standard points. Here's the ranking I found based on how much they improve or decline under that specific pressure. How important do you think a stat like this is? Does the ranking match what you'd expect? I, for one, did not expect Tsitsipas to jump up 4% on breakpoint conversions compared to return points won, nor for Alcaraz to be ranked the worst by this metric. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see the stats. I'm not going to read through all of it. It's heavy stuff. I think even if I read it, it would be not very easy to absorb on audio. But look, I don't have a take on every single player here and or an explanation for why every single player lands where they do. There are some things that make sense, right? So Nadal fares better on break points saved compared to regular service points won than most. He only dips -1 percentage point when facing a break point compared to his regular service points won. You'd have to think that's because he is better on the ad side than the deuce side, and most of his break points would come on the ad side. Sinner also is a better server on the ad side. I think his best serve is the flat serve out wide on the ad side. So some stuff like that might play in. Alcaraz being the only player among all the players you charted here, Alcaraz is the only player who wins fewer return points when up break point compared to regular return points, -1 percentage point. Look, I've observed throughout Alcaraz's young career, many times he has gotten over anxious when he's had chances to break. And that's where there have been some nerves. That's where there have been some shot selection issues. And that's where he has been prone to miss more returns. So it doesn't shock me that Alcaraz is on the bottom of that metric because I've observed it. But for the most part, it's really difficult to really explain each player's placement on this list. The great part about this, what you've really uncovered here, and the thing I really want to highlight here, is that when players face break point largely as a whole, and this pertains to everybody, when they are facing break point, they win fewer service points. When they are up break point, they win more return points. So the question would be, why do break points favor the returner? That's what's really interesting here. And I think it comes down to focus and effort level. Again, this is my theory. winning return points is hard. It takes commitment. You're more likely to have to defend. You are more likely to have to win a longer rally. You are more likely to have to really lock in. And mentally speaking, when you're down 40-15, when you're down 40-love in return games, that is where you let go a bit. Everybody does. And your efficiency as a returner is going to decrease. Your efficiency as a server is going to increase. But when there are break points and the returner is fully engaged and the effort level hits a maximum, I believe that explains why break points benefit the returner. Why statistically you are more likely to win a return point at 30-40 than you are down 15-40. Fascinating stuff. If anybody else has theories on that, go ahead and put them in the comments because that is interesting. Next one from Cloyd. Hi, Gill. Hope you're doing well. I just want to ask you a question about Sinner's play style. I've noticed watching old highlight videos that he hit his regular ground strokes much harder than he does now. This is to be expected and has been a huge part of Jannik's evolution into maybe the best player in the world. However, against Alcaraz, I felt like he was content to just trade neutral balls, which against most would win him the match, but it was really hurting him in the Beijing final, where Carlos was just creating huge advantages off of his forehand from neutral. Do you think the pendulum has, so to speak, swung too far the other way, and that Sinner can sometimes lack the aggressive intent against players like Carlos or Medvedev in the first two Australian Open sets, who is playing highly aggressive and well-executed tennis to win? And he should consider, should he consider altering his mentality/tactics to be more aggressive? Or do you think that his play style is actually more conducive in the long run to lead to success, and he should actually just continue improving what he's doing? Thanks. Yeah, great question. Obviously, I agree with your premise because I said a lot of the same stuff in my analysis of the Beijing final. I think that trying to out-solid Alcaraz usually doesn't work. I think playing neutral against Alcaraz is usually a death wish. And if you go back to when Jannik was beating Alcaraz, not all the time, but I would say at a disproportionate rate, disproportionate to what their respective levels were as players at the time. A lot of the narrative there was that Sinner's ball speeds, his ability to rush Alcaraz, was absolutely crucial. And just, maintaining a lot of pace, maybe in a big targets, but maintaining a lot of pace and especially getting the ball into Alcaraz's forehand with a lot of speed and trying to rush that wing. I mean, that was really essential to, any of the early Sinner wins over Alcaraz. And yeah, I think he should have tried to ramp it up a bit in the Beijing final. And in general, I do believe in that particular matchup, he probably should adjust the sliders a bit. And that's not just Sinner. I think everybody who plays Carlos Alcaraz needs to adjust the sliders a bit. Because when he doesn't feel, first of all, when he has enough time to operate, you're not going to be able to withstand the weaponry and the toolkit offensively that he brings to the table. Nobody is going to be able to withstand that. So I just think you need to apply the maximum amount of pressure on Alcaraz. I just don't know, we could go through his losses and maybe that would be an informative exercise, but I don't see a lot of guys beating Alcaraz by playing really solid and consistent and not forcing the issue a ton. We've seen Tommy Paul compared to his regular style. He's adjusted the sliders. He keeps playing Alcaraz tight because he's redlining his pace and coming forward and taking the ball super, super early. And, I don't know. I think about Struff in the Madrid final. That was close. It was a good effort by Struff. Think about Jari last year getting a win over Alcaraz. I think about Botic van de Zandschulp at the U.S. Open this year. Was he staying back? Nah. He's crushing forehands and coming in. He was so great at punishing Alcaraz for anything short in the court. It was probably the best asset of Botic's entire performance. So this isn't really a Sinner thing because I think the way Jannik is playing stylistically in general, perfect. Don't change a thing. But against Alcaraz, I think that concession needs to be made. There needs to be a priority on taking the ball earlier and hitting the ball harder. And the way to, I think, try to maintain a consistency advantage while doing that is to play into big targets. Play a lot up the middle. Like, I'm not saying Jannik should be so aggressive in terms of, always trying to change direction and trying to pick corners, trying to break the sidelines constantly and miss a ton. I'm not advocating for that at all, but I am advocating for taking a lot of time away and trying to match Alcaraz on the speeds. That's what I am advocating for. Before we get to the next question, a reminder that Monday Match Analysis is brought to you by BetUS Sportsbook and Casino. It can be your betting home for the Rolex Shanghai Masters. And currently, customers can go to betus.com and use the promo code YouTube150 for an 150% deposit bonus up to $2,000. Please gamble responsibly and don't harass the players. I also want to give a shout out to The Draw, my weekly newsletter that will come out on Tuesday morning. And while we are discussing The Draw, let's talk about something that was in The Draw last week. And if you missed it, you can go back and you can read previous issues of The Draw. All you got to do is go to thedraw.tennis and put your email in, because that's the best way. But if you want to read it on the web, that is also perfectly viable. Next comment is from Solar Value. It says, okay, we all want to know, what did you think of the Six Kings trailer? Again, if you don't know what Solar Value is talking about, just check out The Draw, watch the trailer. It was for the Six Kings exhibition, which will be coming up, I think, in a couple weeks' time. And it was the most high-tech, effects-laden tennis promo I have ever seen. And it did so in a way that I think really honored the players and their kind of individual ethos. I mean, Djokovic has kind of made a thing about being one with the wolves, that he is a wolf. In spirit, he is a wolf. So that's just one example of something. They used a lot of CGI effects, and Novak was essentially Wolfman. And it just kind of went from player to player to player, and it gave each player their due. And it was thoughtful, and there was care put into it. And tennis often doesn't have any opportunity to market these events with such precision or such care, because by nature of the sport, we don't even know who is playing who until 24 hours beforehand. So you can do the Sinner Alcaraz promo coming into the U.S. Open all you want. But then Alcaraz loses to Botic, and guess what? There's no Sinner Alcaraz. So it's very difficult to market individual events and individual matches in a way that feel very specific to the players and their individual personalities. And that's what was so great about the Six Kings trailer. I mean, the only person who didn't like it was Andrei Petkovic, who wrote in her newsletter. She's so funny. I love her. She wrote in her newsletter for everybody, like basically for anybody going gaga over the trailer, please watch a movie. Yeah, I can't speak to like the quality of the CGI or anything, but it was just striking to me, and I couldn't be alone here. It was striking to me what a breath of fresh air it was to have a great tennis promotional trailer. Something that in many other sports are quite common. Not tennis. Let's get one from a member. If you want to be a member on YouTube, it is much appreciated. It goes a long way. You can hit the join button and contribute $2 a month to the channel. This one is from member G. Peter. Hey, Gill, I really enjoyed your best players under 24 video. However, I wanted to follow up on it because I was pretty surprised by how low Jiri Lehecka went in the draft. I felt like Lehecka was knocking on the door of becoming an elite player ever since he made some impressive Grand Slam runs in 2023. Aussie Open quarterfinal, Wimbledon fourth round. I don't think it's outlandish to say that Lehecka is capable of redlining his way to a Slam semifinal in the near future, and that he could actually pose a bigger threat to the elites than the likes of Ben Shelton or Lorenzo Musetti, both of whom were drafted much higher than Lehecka in the under 24 draft. It's probably an oversimplification on my part, and therefore I'd love to get your take in the mailbag, but I feel like Lehecka's backhand can't be exploited like that of a Shelton or a Musetti. Could it be possible that Lehecka adds some variety to his ground game and also improves his net game over the next several years and becomes a mainstay in the top 10? Is there any glaring reason I'm missing why Lehecka would go 11th overall in the under 24 draft? He reminds me of Seb Korda because of the massive backhand, but based on his solid performances in Grand Slams when healthy, Lehecka seems less prone to spraying random unforced errors than Seb, don't you think? Yeah, I mean, I've seen Lehecka's backhand get quite erratic at times, but I agree with you that Lehecka probably fell too low. I was thrilled to draft him where I did. I thought the steal of the draft on my part was probably Lehecka. Steal on the draft of Gruskin's part was probably Arthur Fils. Now, obviously, there could be some recency bias coming into play there. The Tokyo champion, who I do believe did get some love in the mailbag. So I'll try to answer a question about him. But let me also answer your question. Here's why I believe Lehecka didn't go higher. For me, when projecting players who have an opportunity to win majors, players who have an opportunity to maybe finish year at number one, I am looking for players who have the potential to be elite offensively and defensively. And ideally, normally, if you have offense and you have defense, you can play from neutral. But there have been some players in the past, Gael Monfils, who doesn't really have much of a neutral game. Holger Rune also struggles a little bit in the neutral game, even though he has attack and he has defense. Very interesting that sometimes happens. But essentially, I want a player who I really trust on all three levels: offense, defense, neutral. And because of Lehecka's movement and his and look, he's a good, strong athlete and he's quick enough around the court. I just don't really see any defense from him. And that is why I believe that's why he falls so low. Now, if he was all offense all the time, but he had the serve of Shelton or Pechi Perikar, it would be a different story, because we know that with a serve like that, you can really get away from not having much defense to your game. You don't end up having to play as many baseline rallies. It is not necessary that you break serve as often. However, Lehecka's got a big serve. Don't get me wrong. I mean, it's a smooth high 120s kind of serve, but it hasn't dominated matches to the point where I see him as an elite server or project him necessarily as an elite server. That is why he fell as far as he did. But he hits absolutely enormous off of both wings. He packs such a big punch that I agree with what you're saying. Like, if you look at potential to play with the big guns, you can never look at Lehecka and say, well, there's a little bit of a lack of firepower. You'll never say that. He just needs to show me that he can move and that he can defend a little. And if not defend a little, then at least show that you can be as consistent from the back of the court as, say, Andrei Rublev. I don't think he's really even shown that kind of level of consistency. That's a good player comp, by the way. In my opinion, better than Korda. A better player comp for Lehecka is Rublev. But one of the underrated things about Rublev's game, everybody talks about how big he hits. He does not make a lot of neutral, unforced errors. When he's playing his best, Rublev is not giving you many ground stroke errors whatsoever. Not a lot of defense there, but he gets on the attack. He attacks you from both wings. Very good at sustaining aggression without missing. Lehecka needs to get to that point. But obviously, I am high on him. This one from the Discord. It is from SJ. Hi, Gill. So the return of serve seems to be the best predictor of success on the ATP Tour. Almost every top player in the last 20 years has been an elite returner, and young prospects who were great returners grow into being top players. On the flip side, poor returners rarely improve much at all, whereas poor servers almost always improve their spot serving and even pace as they age. I also think a great return tends to translate to having great ground strokes and succeeding on multiple surfaces. With this in mind, should we be reevaluating how we look at young prospects? We've seen guys like Shapovalov, FAA, even Tsitsipas fall short of expectations because their return never improved. The name that jumps out to me right now is Rune. He is returning at a Hubert Hurkacz level at the moment without an elite serve, and his return really wasn't that much better in 2022-23. Is it time we set his ceiling lower and expect that he likely will not be a generational talent as his return is unlikely to improve? Well, look, it's certainly great food for thought. And there's a bit of a chicken or the egg situation here when it comes to almost like, are they good because of the return, or are they good at the return because they're good in other areas? And if you don't follow what I'm saying there, it's that the serve is a very singular skill. So the fact that you can serve doesn't really say much of anything about the rest of your game. It just says you can serve. But if you return well, if you just take the return itself, it says something about your technique. It says something about your hand-eye coordination. It says something about your athleticism. It actually usually says something about how good your hands are, how quick your hands are, and how soft your hands are. So there's a lot of things. There's a lot of things that come into play when it comes to actually having a good return. And then if you go a step further, and when you're talking about returning, are you talking about just the return of serve, or are you talking about winning return points? Because if we're talking about winning return points, now you go to, well, how good are you at winning rallies? And that's a skill set that comes into play on both serve games and return games, which is why most of the best returners are the best players, because most of the best returners are the best ralliers. They win baseline rallies. And that's why they are at the top of break percentage. It's not just the return itself as a shot. If you look at players that you named, Shapovalov, FAA, Tsitsipas, you would hardly say that these players are elite at winning neutral baseline rallies. So these things tend to go hand in hand. You got somewhat of a chicken or an egg situation here. As for Rune, in particular, the returning thing is alarming. The statistics are just a little bit flabbergasting. You'd expect him to be way better in return points won than what he is. And it's something to look at. I don't quite understand it at this time. If I had a really great theory on what goes wrong on Holger's return, and I'm going to work towards creating a theory because I think it's important. If I had a really good theory, I'd probably be able to drive my answer even further, but I have to stop there because I don't yet have a really great theory on Holger. From Mr. Resaftery. Who do you think has had a better overall career thus far, Berrettini or Fritz? Also, who do you think has an overall better level of tennis? They are close in age and have similar results, both slam finalists. Also, what similarities and differences do you see in their playing style? I don't know if I'm going to answer every part of this question, but who's had a better career? In some ways, it's close, but when I first read the question, I was like, definitely Matteo, right? And what's really the separator there is, Berrettini, semifinals at 3 out of the 4 majors. The one that he hasn't made the semis, he's been in the quarters, Roland Garros. But he's been to 4 major semifinals. Taylor's been to 1. That right there it's a huge difference. It's kind of an insurmountable difference when you're comparing their career accolades, in my opinion. But if you look at some other metrics like top 10 finishes, Fritz is about to finish top 10 for a 3rd year in a row. And Berrettini, he's got 3 as well. 3 in a row from 2019 to 2021. Injuries probably have prevented that number from being higher for Matteo, but you can't give guys bonus points for getting injured. You just got to take it for what it is. They're also kind of similar in the sense that they've lacked tier 1 competitiveness. They've been excellent players, but they haven't punched up very often against the tier 1 players. They've both had huge Novak Djokovic problems. Neither were early bloomers, but Fritz definitely took a longer time. One thing that Matteo, I think, has had from a pretty young age is he's known exactly how he needs to play, the brand of tennis that is going to give him the best chance of winning matches. That clicked for Matteo very early on, but for Taylor, it took a while. And that's, I think, why we've seen Fritz kind of catch up to Matteo Berrettini, but it took a while. Now we might be ahead, but I'd say right at this second, it's probably pretty close, even if the rankings don't flesh that out. If you ask me who has the higher level, it would depend on surface. I mean, I'm taking Berrettini on clay and grass, but I'm taking Fritz on hard court. No doubt about it. The biggest difference between the two stylistically, Berrettini, as good as Fritz's serve and forehand is, it ain't Matteo. It's not Berrettini. So Berrettini's got more overwhelming weapons. He's going to blow you off the court a little bit easier. But Taylor has baseline balance. Taylor's got an awesome backhand. Great topspin backhand. One that Matteo could only dream of. If you gave Matteo Berrettini Taylor Fritz's backhand, the movement would still be a problem. So I'm not going to be like, he'd be world number 1. He'd be winning slams. I'm not going to go crazy with it because the movement would still be a problem. But Matteo with Taylor Fritz's backhand, I would say, would have a similar career as he would be probably another Zverev Medvedev range kind of guy, in my opinion. I think he'd have a major title. Let's go rapid fire. This one is from a member, and I'm going to shorten some of these comments just for speed. How important is anticipation in the game? If so, is it something innate to certain players, or can it be trained specifically? Are there different levels of anticipation? I remember from your deleted Andy Murray video. Okay, I'm going to leave it at that. I don't remember deleting any Andy Murray video. Maybe I'm forgetting, but yeah, that doesn't ring a bell. I don't normally delete videos, except for when they're really old and I'm embarrassed. Anticipation is so important. I don't know of any great defenders who don't have great anticipation. I can't really think of a lot of great players who don't have great anticipation. But there are so many levels to it. Like on the most basic level, you have to teach a young player. And you ask an interesting question. Is it innate or can it be trained? I think a lot of it at the highest level is innate. but you can also work on it, right? If you think about a basic level of anticipation that you would work on with a developing junior, maybe a very young developing junior, the idea of, hey, like when your opponent takes the racket back like this with the continental grip, and they're a two-handed backhand, and they have the left hand on the throat of their racket, they're about to hit a backhand slice. And based on that backhand slice, if you are at that moment 6 feet behind the baseline, you should probably already be moving up in the court, because they are not going to, they're likely to hit the ball short. And even if they hit it deep, you're not going to need to be 7 feet behind the baseline to retrieve a slice coming from your opponent. So that's just one example I throw out there of, yeah, there are certain things that you can work on with the player. I chose a very basic example there that a lower level player would have to work on, but you can work on certain elements of anticipation. From Nike Boy, hey Gill, just wondering how conventional wisdom goes as far as the best player in the world. What are the main benchmarks you zero in on when it's close between Sinner and Alcaraz as it is this year? Which, funny enough, I think Sinner will probably extend his lead in the next 3 tournaments, given it's his favorite surface for sure. Performance at majors is number 1. And then I think the ranking system itself. The ranking system does, in my opinion, a pretty good job of telling you who's played better than the other. Usually it does a pretty good job there. And then the third one would be head-to-head. From Michi, hey Gil, did you notice that Sinner went back to his completely calm demeanor on court? After his loss to Tiafoe at Vienna in 2021, he was so annoyed at the opponent taking advantage of the crowd that he started doing it as well to his advantage. Why do you think he changed that back, and do you think this is the way that is best for him? I have to wonder about the effect of all of the doping stuff, and has that made him a little more introverted and reserved at this moment in time? And has that hurt him? Because when I started seeing Sinner in 2022 start to pump himself up sometimes and get the crowd involved and play with more energy, I thought that was a great positive development for his game. I'd love to see him rekindle that at some point. Last one from Diego Federer. Hey Gil, if you were a professional tennis player, do you think you'd be able to sustain the lifestyle? Numerous hours of training a day, flying almost every week, away from friends and family. Yeah, I do. I mean, look, I've made certain sacrifices in my life to pursue my dream. I was long distance from my girlfriend for 2 years out of college. And now I still spend a lot of time, way more time away from her than I would like. And I'm not making like a one-to-one. By the way, I moved away. Like, all my friends live in New York. I live across the country from all the people I grew up with, right? That's a sacrifice. I live across the country from my parents. It's a sacrifice. So, I have it. Same could be said for tennis players. I'm very lucky. I have it very, very good. I'm also not saying that my sacrifice is the same as theirs, but, you make certain sacrifices to pursue your dreams. And if you have enough love in your life, and you have the right people around you, and you believe in what you're doing and why you're doing it, and you maintain connection with what's important, then you're okay. Then you'll be okay. So let's end it on that uplifting note, huh? I'll talk to you later this week. Thank you again, BetUS. Hope you enjoyed. Don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you next time.